The subject that I'm going to broach this morning is one that gets full press on one Sunday of the year, guaranteed. But after that, we don't discuss it much from the pulpit. Yet, nonetheless, we think about it all the time. Or should I say, very frequently. Would anyone like to guess the topic? No. It's what next? What will happen to us? What will happen to our loved ones once our earthly lives are over? Some people don't like thinking about what follows death. Thoreau was a case in point. The story goes, and some of you have heard this, but I love it. Thoreau was lying on his deathbed, and his friend, Parker Pillsbury, leaned over his bedside and asked, "Henry, what are you seeing? Are you getting a glimpse of the other side?" To which Thoreau responded, "One world at a time, Parker. One world at a time." A lot of people feel like that, even in theological circles. The time was when ministers preached a lot about heaven and people sang joyfully about going there. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. Do you know that one? Yeah. What a hymn that is. And "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," or "Going Back to My Grandfather's Day," in the sweet by and by. We sang it at his funeral. Does anyone remember that hymn? But today, the focus seems to have switched from talking about heaven per se to talking about heaven on earth. Yes, we have wonderful hymns like "Soon and Very Soon" and "I'll Fly Away." But for the most part, they're not sung very often because people would just as soon not go there. I think that Garrison Keillor of Lake Wobegon probably speaks for a lot of people when he says, "My people are not paradise people. We've lived in Minnesota all our lives, and it took a lot out of us. My people aren't sure if we'll even like paradise because we're not sure that perfection is all it's cracked up to be." So, better just not to think about it. Why dwell on what we can't know anything about? At least not yet. That's a fair question. And personally, I admit I probably think about death more than is necessary. But be that as it may, it is important to decide one thing. Are we each a body that happens to have a spirit, or are we essentially a spirit that happens to have a body? Are we, in essence, a finite and gaseous vertebrate, as Ernst Haeckel once stated? Or, as the New Testament tells us, are we a child of God, created for eternal life? It's fascinating to me to think of the fact that biologists tell us that one's cell tissue and structure of the body changes completely every 7 or 8 years. In other words, when we say, "I'm not the person I used to be," we are right on. Because over time, we are, cell by cell, completely rebuilt and recreated. So we are indeed more than our bodies because we are the same person who by now has survived, has lived through several such cycles, some more cycles than others. It matters. It matters if we think of ourselves as mere mortals, or if we think that having been given life, that we are a part of God's humongous and grand design. Think for a moment of someone you know and loved who has died. Physically speaking, that person was comprised of enough iron to make a nail, enough sugar to fill a shaker, enough magnesium to make a dose of milk of magnesia, and enough phosphorus to make a matchtip. And that's it. That's what's left. Yet God, as the Creator, had the extraordinary and awesome power to bring those elements together in such a way that they could house the soul that you knew and loved. A soul that could cherish you, love you, and honor you, and still inspire you to this day. That's incredible, don't you think? That miracle? And the good news, as stated by Wernher von Braun, a scientist who was one of the foremost authorities on space travel, is that nothing in nature, not even the tiniest particle, can disappear without a trace. Nature, he said, does not know extinction. All nature knows is transformation. We turn to the words of Jesus in John 14 and hear the depth of this same assurance from a spiritual perspective. First, Jesus tells the disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's dwelling place, there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you?" Jesus, throughout his ministry, told people like it was. And as you know, it was not always what they wanted to hear. He warned them of their forthcoming persecutions. He warned them of the hatred, of the torture that they would have to endure for his sake, and they did. And he told them of the cross that they too would have to carry, and they did. But now, at this point in the discourse, he is also telling them of the glory that awaits them, of the glory that lies ahead. And he says what people over and over attest to in their near-death experiences, that he will take them to himself, so that where he is, we may be also. And that is at the heart of his promise, that we will be with him. Can we even begin to imagine what he will look like? I think so. Every Sunday morning at our 8 o'clock service, someone stands here at the pulpit and describes for the rest of us what Jesus looks like in his or her life. And every description is a little bit different, yet it's also the same. And somehow, every week, we recognize him. Sometimes Jesus might come across as a healing physician, sometimes as a coach, sometimes as a kind but stern teacher. Yet regardless, whenever we hear him described from the depths of people's hearts, we know that we are all talking about the same person. Why? Because we have already seen him. And yes, as Paul says, now it's like looking in a mirror dimly. Paul wrote at a time when mirrors were nothing more than polished metal, so that would be like looking at yourself in a toaster oven. Yet at the same time, Paul assures us that we are to know that the day will come when we will see him face to face, and beholding him will be our glory. As most of you know, when our daughter Julie was 6 years old, she had hip surgery. And she went to Children's Hospital in Boston, where they worked very hard explaining in kid-friendly language what her surgery was going to do and how she wouldn't feel anything because of the anesthesia, and a little bit about how anesthesia worked. And after a fairly lengthy explanation, the anesthesiologist said, "So, now, Julie, do you have any questions for me?" And she hesitated, and then in a very soft and quiet voice, she said, "Yes, I have one. When I wake up, where will my mommy and daddy be?" And then he told her, "They are going to be the very first people you see. They will be standing right here beside you, holding your hand. And one or the other is going to stay with you all day and all night until it's time for you to go home. And then you go as a family." "Okay," she said. "That's all I need to know." Jesus said, "I go and prepare a place for you, so that where I am, you may be also." Those are the words that cast out fear. Those are the words that bring hope. Those are the words that fill us with courage. And Jesus' good news about what happens next is not that we can ever comprehend it, or that we will ever know what the next life will be like precisely, but that we know all that we need to know, which is that we know who will be with us, and we know that we will see him face to face.